Herzlich willkommen, wir stellen euch heute den Offenbacher Stadtteil Rumpenheim vor. Dieser ist das Rumpenheimer Schloss, ist eine
Welcome back to Combat Mission and to Rumpenheim, which is without a doubt the most unlucky village on the banks of the River Main, as it is the stage for an amphibious assault by a Soviet battalion for a second time. In my previous video I showed the first time Rumpenheim was expertly demolished, as I commanded my Soviet troops in their amphibious assault to take the town from the American defenders, commanded by Magellan Jones. In this second video the roles will be reversed, as I will be the one tasked with defending Rumpenheim against Magellan's Soviet onslaught. I highly recommend watching the previous video first if you haven't, for the introduction I gave to this scenario, but here's a quick recap. The Soviets seek to cross the River Main in order to take Rumpenheim, and to this end they employ a T-64B company and a full mechanized infantry battalion. And that's nothing to sneeze at, as that comes down to about 50 IFVs capable of carrying about 400 infantrymen across the river. The Americans are heavily outnumbered, as they only have a number of scouts, HQs and forward observers for infantry, plus 8 M60 tanks, 4 tow launchers and some artillery. I expect this battle to be fierce and fast paced, so I've had to come up with something to keep track in this video of what is going on and where. So I've decided to switch on my Atari SA200, providing situational awareness since 1982. The advantage of having few troops is that it's possible to keep track of them individually in the video, and this will certainly help. While deploying my troops I was faced with the same problem Magellan was. How do you stop a juggernaut of an infantry battalion from crossing the river if they are being overwatched by 14 of the enemy's heaviest tanks? The odds of survival of any unit that I deploy within sight of the river don't seem terribly attractive, and if it wasn't for the T-64s then there's also the vast amount of enemy artillery to contend with, which I suppose will be concentrated on the first row of buildings. At the same time, ceding the river is not an option, as the battle will basically be decided before it started if I allow Magellan to cross an entire infantry battalion unopposed. So I've come up with a 3-step plan to oppose the river crossing as best as I can with the resources that I have. The first step is punching the very first Soviets that show their faces on the nose. This lets the enemy know that they are not safe to move about as they like, even if I don't really have much to prevent them from doing so. To this end, I've deployed 2 tanks and 2 tow vehicles in a forward position. They are vulnerable there, but I'm counting on these concrete walls that are the perfect height for a hold down position to increase their odds of survival, and by only deploying a fraction of my forces there, my exposure to the Soviet artillery will be limited. After hitting the first enemy units on the nose, my aim is to withdraw them for the second phase. In the back, my remaining tanks and tow launchers will deploy inside these little backyards, as I hope that the concrete walls surrounding them will protect them from flying shrapnel. For the second phase they will then move into keyhole positions. By peeking out through between buildings they will not be able to see much, but that's the point. If I can only see one T-64 from here, then only one T-64 can see me, taking away the numerical advantage of the Soviets. And this is all the more important as I'm not optimistic about getting one-hit kills on these notoriously well-armored tanks. The third phase begins when Magellan's infantry companies come forward to cross the river. My plan is to blind the T-64s with a smokescreen of my own, after which my vehicles can leave their keyhole positions and go forward to destroy the BMPs while they're in the water. The smokescreen will not last forever though, so I will have to do maximum damage in just a few minutes, after which my tanks will have to retreat to their keyhole positions. I'm not sure if I can pull this plan off a second or third time if Magellan chooses to cross in more than one wave, but from some point I'll just have to make it up as I go along. The battle begins, and it seems that I was wrong about Magellan aiming the brunt of his artillery on the first row of buildings. Instead, he's targeting the center of town where my vehicles are parked. At least in this phase of the battle the damage is not too bad, as my tanks don't suffer more than some minor subsystem damage. The Soviet Air Force is a bigger concern though, as it takes out one of the much needed tow vehicles. But Magellan is not the only one who can annoy the neighbors with loud artillery. This forest over here looks like a perfect staging area for the Soviets to assemble and get into formation before moving up. so I order a fire mission of around 4 rounds every minute that will last for half an hour. It won't destroy anything, bar the small chance of a direct hit, but I hope that it'll annoy the hell out of them and maybe cause Magellan to enter the battle in a bit less well organized formation. After 10 minutes I finally spot the first of the enemy's forces as a group of BRDMs comes forward, apparently probing my defenses. A third one decides that my defenses have been sufficiently probed for today. When Magellan's tank company shows up, it's time to pull back all 4 forwardly deployed vehicles and end phase 1. But I will only pull back 2, and I have a very good, if somewhat embarrassing reason for that. I just now realize that I've put 1 tank and 1 tow vehicle in a spot that they can't get out of. Must have taken the engineers all morning to get them in there. It's time to start phase 2, as Magellan will soon move his tanks into their firing positions. I move my own vehicles to their positions, but this is where the Soviet artillery starts to bite. 2 of my tanks are immobilized in a position from where they can't see the river nor the other riverbank, so I've just lost a quarter of my M60 firepower, and this is a significant loss. Nonetheless, my remaining tanks and tow launchers are now in position. As I feared, my M60s are not penetrating the T-64's armor. But I can't exactly complain about bad luck, as I don't lose a single vehicle in this exchange, thanks to my own armor, these concrete walls provided by the city of Rumpenheim. Perhaps to increase their chances of actually hitting something, a number of Soviet tanks come forward. This puts them at a range where they can actually be killed. Sure, it's not a one-hit kill, or 2, or 3, or 4, but 5 hits are definitely sufficient to prove that they are in fact only mortal. And now that the cat is out of the bag, it's hard to put it back in. Another T-64 exposes the side of its turret and is promptly taken out. And these guys actually forgot that they were a T-64, as they let a M60 shell in through the front and clean out through the back. All in all, it's enough to make Magellan decide to retreat his tanks to a safer distance, for now. Because as Magellan's smokescreen on my side of the river starts to build, and the first BMPs are spotted just behind the Soviet tanks, it's clear that Magellan is about to send his first wave across the river. So I let the forward observer call in the counter smokescreen. I give a phenomenal pre-battle speech that I had to cut for time, and all I can do at this point is hope for the best in the next few minutes. The Soviet tanks form up right on the riverbank, and I fear that this will make my counter smokescreen ineffective, as the wind will blow the smoke away from the river. The advantage on the other hand is that my tow launchers are now getting some great flanking shots. It's then that I spot the first Soviet IFVs approaching the river, and since every IFV that is taken out before or during the river crossing takes a full infantry squad with it, I try to prioritize them as much as I can in between turns. After just a few minutes, only 2 of the enemy T-64s remain on the riverbank. 3 other Soviet tanks that have been waiting on the sidelines are then sent forward by Magellan to support the river crossing. Although the concrete wall saves the tank, the tracks are destroyed, making this my 3rd immobilized tank. Although I've sent several Soviet IFVs to the bottom of the river, some are starting to get through and are reaching the other riverbank. In the last 5 minutes or so, I've pulled the brunt of my infantry forces into the first row of buildings there, to try and push the Soviets back into the river. The fight on the river shore is rather one-sided, as my M113 basically breaks all the enemy infantry coming out of their IFVs, after which they have nowhere to run, and they are taken out by my infantry garrisoning the buildings. And when a Soviet IFV does make it past the field of view of my M113 and my tanks, then they are fodder for the law rockets of my infantry. For a moment then, things quiet down, and it looks like I have actually successfully repelled Magellan's first wave, at the cost of just 1 tank, 1 tone launcher and a Dragon team or 2. But there is cause for concern, as Magellan is attacking over my left flank, and 3 of my tanks are immobilized without having line of sight on that area. Also, my Dragon teams have exhausted almost all of their ammunition, as have my tow vehicles. Of their 8 missiles, they now have respectively 1 and 2 missiles left. The quiet moment lasts for almost 1 whole turn, and then Magellan's second wave appears. As his BMPs reach the river shore, they pop smoke, and let me pause for just 1 second here, to borrow a bit of info provided by Dumbfluff. NATO smoke is all about quick development at short range, to be used defensively. Soviet smoke on the other hand is fired forward about 100 meters. It's slower to build and it lasts longer, and it's meant to be used offensively as a screen to maneuver behind. So Magellan already has quite a bit of smoke on the water from the first wave, which lasts about 5 minutes, and is now adding to that in the second wave. It's becoming increasingly difficult to spot the BMPs as they cross the river, even for flanking shots. Once the BMPs emerge from their own smokescreen, Magellan uses their autocannons to suppress my defenses, to use a euphemism. He's also decided to promote his anti-tank BRDMs to rocket artillery, further adding to the misery of my defenders. Having lost yet another tank on the left flank, it's now become entirely impossible to stop Magellan's assault there. The best that I can hope for now is for my infantry to buy some time until the reinforcements arrive. I would never have thought it possible at the start of the battle, but Magellan's tank company is eventually wiped away completely. But the truth is that they were never the real threat, as they can't push me out of Rumpenheim. The BMPs are, and they just keep coming. Here goes my very last tow missile, meaning that my tow vehicles are now out of the game. A serious blow to my defenses. And eventually so many BMPs managed to ferry their infantry across the river that I have no choice but to start pulling back my defenders, as they would otherwise simply be overrun. The pressure on the left flank is simply too much, and my forces are too spread out to meet Magellan's concentrated push. I decide to withdraw all of my troops in town and to send them to the castle to combine their firepower there in a last stand. The drawback of this plan is that my stranded tanks will be without infantry cover, meaning that they will inevitably be overrun, as I believe Magellan is yet to cross his third wave. But they'll be able to slow down the BMPs that could be chasing my infantry as they make their way to the castle on foot. Now, since I couldn't drive these tanks around the battlefield to a favorable position, I'll have to make the battlefield around their position favorable for them. I ordered the tanks to demolish the nearby buildings to clear their fields of view. Then the waiting begins. Two anti-air infantrymen passed the tanks by on their way to the castle, with Ivan hot on their heels. Three of the tank crew survive and they hide in a nearby house. This time, the crew is not so fortunate as to get away with their lives. My other forces then all reach the castle, and it's not a moment too soon. as Magellan's artillery barrage on the area between the landing site and the castle is then really cranked up to 11. This artillery is not specifically aimed at the castle yet, so my losses are not too bad, and my reinforcements finally arrive in the form of one infantry platoon. I quickly proceed to send them to the castle as well. Magellan's third and final infantry company is then spotted heading towards the river. Although I managed to sink his first wave and badly damage the second one, I don't have too many resources left to stop this third one. So I'm relieved when my air support finally shows up.
This is Cobra 6. Targets identified. Vectors inbound. 3, 2, 1.
We got air! Get down!
Fortunately, Magellan's air defenses saved me from needing to have a very awkward job performance review with the pilot. Magellan's pilots are doing a lot better. Here they can be seen replacing one of my tanks with a hole in the ground. With this tank taken out, all I have left covering the river is one Dragon team with one remaining missile. Not quite enough to stop a company. So I order an M60 tank to volunteer to advance up the riverbank through the smoke to put some hurt on those BMPs while they still carry their infantry. I quickly develop a routine where I send the tank forward, they spot a BMP, take it out and then automatically pull back. Then in the next turn we do it all again. It's a routine that actually works pretty well, even if sometimes they just like to sit there and stare at the water and think about life and the purpose of it all. But eventually a BMP gets a shot off and takes out the tank, but that's not before it has taken out at least a platoon's worth of IFVs and hopefully their infantry as well. The crew of the stranded M60 that did get out of the tank alive didn't actually all make it. The commander and gunner were killed on the way to the castle and the driver is now hiding inside the house. As I need every single rifle that I can get my hands on inside the castle, I decide to risk sending a jeep through the artillery storm to pick him up. The jeep doesn't make it, and 30 seconds later, Ivan catches up with the driver. With everyone now back at the castle, I've got 15 minutes to go until the timer runs out. 15 minutes during which I need to keep control of this area, which probably doesn't sound too bad as I've got quite a few survivors and a fresh mechanized platoon. But Magellan's artillery barrage is devastating and it just goes on and for 5 minutes straight I lose about 3 men per turn without actually seeing Magellan's troops. And with 1 turn per day, this was just a week where I woke up every morning to see my forces slowly melt away a bit further. Then a number of Magellan's BMPs appear behind me, as they have gone around the town and are now attacking me in the rear. I had not expected Magellan to start an assault while his artillery barrage was still ongoing. But by doing so with only his BMPs, he's using the fact that those are quite invulnerable from the artillery's effects, while my defending infantrymen are in fact very much suppressed. At first I take comfort in the fact that I've got quite a few M113s and mortar carriers with 50 cals outside the castle defending, but the BMPs just tear through those like they're made of tissue paper. The only one actually able of putting up a fight at this moment is my last remaining M60. Finally then, my engineers arrive to the party. spectacularly late yet unbelievably welcome for the Dragon launcher that they bring, as I hope that they'll be able to provide some relief on the pressure the BMPs are putting up. I sneaked them in behind the BMP's backs and into a house with good sightlines, and in just a few turns they turned 3 BMPs into scrap, somewhat consolidating the situation on that flank. Then I noticed that the artillery barrage has quieted down. But this is, of course, not actually good news. It signals that Magellan is bringing in his infantry, and that the last stand at Castle Rumpenheim really is about to begin. I've not placed my troops inside the castle itself, but in the buildings just south and west of it, so that I can fall back on the castle when necessary. At first, Magellan puts pressure on my southern flank, and for a while he's not able to cross the street. Then his BMP starts softening up the buildings on my side of the road. The buildings on the perimeter are lost, and I withdraw whatever survivors I have to the castle. And although this rids me of the autocannons of the BMPs, it's quite clear that I'm simply outnumbered by far. At every stage where I try to make a stand, Magellan masses more men in the next turn and pushes me back a bit further. In the end, I have to pull back all the way to the far end of the castle, and by now we've already entered overtime. And as my very last GI is crawled up into a ball, screaming in terror and probably reeking of urine, the time for the scenario runs out. And the game will tell you that I won the scenario, as I still have 1 soul inside the objective area. Clearly though, my forces have been wiped out and Magellan has taken Rumpenheim, so the victory is his. 5 more seconds to this game and my last man would have gone down anyways. Yes, I did take his battalion out of the war, with somewhere around 85% of his BMPs either burning or at the bottom of the river, but the first Soviet army will definitely envelop Frankfurt further downriver now, before the day is out. So, having played the scenario twice now, once for either side, and with the US firmly beaten in both games, the question arises, can this scenario be won by the US player? Magellan and I don't think so, but I would also argue that it doesn't really matter. Being the underdog in this scenario threw me around from euphoria to despair and back again like few scenarios have. And I took a poll among my subscribers on YouTube and a surprising number of players seem to agree. 2/3 are okay with a somewhat unbalanced game for the sake of realism, and a quarter is even okay with very unbalanced games if it benefits realism. Way higher numbers than I would have thought. Well, let me close off by thanking everyone who got this far, as this has been an unusually long video. And thanks to my opponent Magellan, who has been consistently providing me with battles that are so fun to capture in videos like this one. The next one will probably be a bit shorter again, I promise. I'll hope to see you in the next one. Until then.